I think it's been quite some time now in the project, and what I want to share with you at this stage of the project is pretty much our experience with reusing content, and how we feel about it, and what are the things we're trying to, what we learned out of this process. And one thing which I would like to add in this context is that when we started, we mostly thought it would be reuse of just digital material. Right now, we are very, very much convinced that this is a much more complicated thing, and it's also much more hybrid, to also be influenced by the hybrid publishing project, which I think pilot, which for us it was a revelation for quite a number of reasons. So if there are 5 things that we got out of this experience, and I'm going to give out the conclusions at the very, very first slide. The first one is that hacking is a form of a learning experience, and actually it's a learning experience both for the participants, but even more so for the organization that actually does the hackathons. And for us has been a major source of inspiration and organizational learning. And I'll reveal something at the end about this one, what other effect it had on us. The second thing is that initially, we thought what we were doing was mostly reusing resources. At the end of the project, we understand that what we are doing is pretty much reusing platforms. So the real question for an organization, for a cultural organization, and perhaps I should say a few lines about our organization, is how do we actually position our digital strategy with regards to the platforms, whether these platforms are something like Wikipedia, or Europeana, or Google. So for us, this is really crucial. So in the development of our system at this stage, we are mostly concerned with API crafting and how do we actually build whatever we do, whether it is a repository or whether it is an application that reuses material, in relation to platforms that use APIs and feed our system. So that was also a major learning point. The third thing is that on the one hand, we want to encourage diversity. On the other hand, if we want to be an organization that addresses a pan-European audience, eventually we have to standardize both in terms of tools and also in terms of language. So we need to actually have English translations for what we do. And I think I talked about this one during the event that took place in Athens, and I'll return to this one with a few additions. Fourth thing, really, really important, this is not just about digital stuff, it's very much about physicalities, both in terms of how the devices that actually contain digital content, they're immersed in our environments, but also about the physical link to the people that actually visit our organization. For us, this is particularly relevant because we're an organization that actually hosts over 200, 250 events, talks, workshops per year, and in a pretty big physical space. Those of you that have been in Athens, you've seen it. So we have about an event per day, it means that we need to meet the people. So for us, the physical element is quite important. And finally, the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid. Try to make things as simple as possible, not reinvent the wheel. So let's see each one of them first. So the hack experience. We had a huge, for us it was a huge experience doing the Hack the Book event. We are grateful to all of you that participated, that contributed before, that contributed afterwards. What we found there is that we didn't want to do, in the first place, we realized we didn't just want to have a hack event, a hackathon, which was just about software. And one of the reasons why this was, in terms of our strategy, why we decided to do that, was that we had very few people in Greece that were able to appreciate what it means to do a hackathon. So we wanted to entice the software developers, but also also to bring an audience that's kind of allergic to coding. So we wanted to bring them gradually to coding. So we had a lot of creative stuff and a lot of physical stuff. Now, if you see here, which is a picture of the hackathon, I'll show you more of that. You see that at the back, we had this lab there, which was like a working bench, where people had physical things to work with. They could craft items, and they had to incorporate digital content into the physical content. So they had somehow to link it to sensors that produce data, or they linked it to sensors that link to devices that could actually consume data or content, and also to move from the physical to the digital. So we had people printing out Europeana content into physical items, and physical items that would actually being digitized and then be brought into the Europeana space. And to do that, we use the Europeana space, and of course we use the space, and we also used width a lot. And we also had fantastic input from our experts interacting with our community there. So what we realized was that the hybrid environment was very relevant, physical and digital. And the other thing is we moved in a very incremental and iterative fashion, which means we didn't have just a single event, but we had a kind of a roadshow. So we started with some talks that actually took place in the big community festivals that we had for open content source and hardware. Then we moved to a pre-event where we actually gave material to the participants, and we actually moved from a crowd of 300 people to a crowd of 70 people. And then we had the actual hackathon, which was 48 hours, and where we had 35 people. So in each of the stages, we would actually train, we would understand our audience, and we would understand our community and our limitations, and then we would also have the move along the whole procedure. And I think what it came out of the hackathon, which for me was very, very crucial for what we do in terms of content, is the alternate reality narratives. So what we realized was that most of the participants didn't think linearly. They were young people, mostly university students or young professionals. They would not have linear stories, none of them. And all of them, at the same time, all of them would be interested in the question of narrative. How do I narrate in a hybrid environment? Is it just saying a story? Is it leaving the objects there and creating an environment where people could actually create their own stories? My audience can create their own stories. And most of them, they tended to do the latter. We had very few cases of a straightforward linear narrative, which was, again, very interesting for us, being an organization that engages audiences. How do we actually produce our own narratives? Going to the second part, I've talked about this one before several times, which is the rule of the platform. Every time we need to do anything which is digital in our organization, we basically have to ask three questions. How much does it cost to produce it? If we have something which is physical, how do we make it digital? Or if it's digital old generation, how do we actually make it digital, which can be used somehow? So it means to have metadata and possibly be available through an API. And finally, what does it mean for our operational costs and maintenance costs? So these are three questions which pretty much define the decisions we take. So currently, we are redeveloping our repository software, and we are very much thinking, what should we do? Should we just take an Omeka software and just customize it as an open source software? Should we buy off-the-shelf repository, or should we just do nothing and ask Google to come with the Cultural Institute and tell them just digitize a couple of stuff, do a narrative, and that's it, and forget about it. This is not our business. So you always have to think on this basis. But when you start thinking about this one, you realize that the platforms make the rules. So depending on which are the platforms which you are going to engage, you're going to take different decisions. So we made a very conscious decision, at this stage at least, to use a kind of a mixed strategy. So we're definitely going to have Wikipedia as part of what we do, both in terms of consuming content from Wikipedia and Europeana, and that was one of the reasons why we are in this project, and we reiterated this reason. The other thing was to actually see how we can further expand the functionalities of such platforms. And the second decision we took was to actually develop our own custom-made repository, because we couldn't really integrate the functions of digital asset management and repository management with the tools we could find out there. So this is something, hopefully in the November conference, I will be able to show you some of the stuff we've done. So we need to use the platforms that suit our business model best. Possibly we are going to use some Google stuff, but it's just going to be for collaborative editing. And we're toggling between Google and Dropbox. The reason why we're thinking of that is because it solves a lot of operational problems and reduces substantially our costs. At the same time, it needs to be somehow integrated with the stuff we are building ourselves. And then we always ask ourselves, what are we and what we are not? So we are not a software house, and we are not we are not an educational institute. We are a cultural organization that needs at the end of the day to provide good experiences to our attendants. So we need to do that without compromising our future to the digital platforms. So let's go to the third part, which is diversity, which is quite important for us. I've shown that in Athens as well. This is our dream always, to have an internet which you have multiple languages and everyone actually define its own space. But when you actually see Wikipedia, which is pretty open, you see where English is with over 5 million articles, and you don't even see Greek, because I think it's just over 100,000 different articles. And for us, this is important because within our mission statement is to promote Greek culture, and contemporary Greek culture. So how do we actually handle this problem? I think you, of course, have the big languages and then the rest. And even in the case of open mega platforms like Wikipedia, you have to figure out what you're doing. So one of the things we decided to do was to host some specific events, which first of all would increase the articles in the Greek Wikipedia. So we had an event, a couple of events with our library, to actually make the Greek students aware of the content we hosted as an institution. And at the same time, one of the things we are going to experiment next year with is, in each event we have, which is contemporary, most of them are performative contemporary arts, we want to have certain keywords where we include in the announcements the relevant articles from Wikipedia, and we have hackathons along the main events, so that people, through actually doing, editathons, by doing the writing of the articles, they actually understand what it means to do, let's say, improvisation in theater, or the irrational theater, or avant-garde Russian art, which there is a big collection in Greece. So for all these things, you use the editathons as an educational tool in order for people that actually enter an exhibition, especially if it's contemporary art, which is not easily accessible. Having done these workshops, they operate as an avenue for people to understand what you're doing. And we tend to do that bilingual. In most of the cases, we find the stuff in English, and we need to do a relevant article in Greek. So we need to have our own Wikimedia strategy, and I say Wikimedia because it's not just a Wikipedia, it very much relates to how you use Wikidata, how you use Wikimedia Commons, what are you posting, what you're not posting. And the other thing which we are working on is what we call the digital journey. So we want to understand our audience, how they move from a platform like Wikipedia to our website, to our social media, and back. Again, this is not always obvious. And for that reason, we needed to actually, we didn't want to do it fully internally. We worked with an external consultant in order to understand these journeys and actually manage to quantify them as well. Another thing which we learned from this experience was the whole thing with the Cavafy poems, the platform we created, and here with Postscriptum. Here we understood that reusing your content means basically reinforcing your brand. So the way you're going to do it is really important. And here we have developed a font which is Cavafy's handwriting. Now this seems like it's an extremely simple technological platform. Is stupid, right? And you can do very little things, but it's very much used in schools. So when we go and we have one of our teachers using it, kids actually respond to that, and it has a very clear aesthetic. So basically, you can see what this thing does. It's very simple to create a narrative, a stupid narrative or a clever narrative, and also to reuse content from multiple sources, which again, I return to this one. For instance, I think this was a sketch I did this morning with Cavafy, and I got some Wikipedia, I have some Flickr, I have some Europeana. So you have with this option to choose different sources, and increasingly you need to be agnostic as to from where you take your material. The other thing, and which we realized that was that as I said at the outset of this talk, is that the events themselves, the hackathon event we did, was very important for us as an organization to learn. And one of the things we learned was that we knew nothing about the digital community really in Greece. They seem to have been a bit more advanced than we were. And in order to actually catch up with this community, we actually got some of the people that we identified through the hackathon processes. We have now hiring one of them in our organization in order to further develop this community. So we're trying to internalize somehow the knowledge from the community, either in the form of placements or in the form of having some of them as collaborators. And also it's something which is not boring and is really crucial, because the attention span of people today is increasingly becoming smaller and smaller. Beyond digital. Now, this is something we also got to understand in the context of another set of exhibitions we did. We are planning, we've already done 2 exhibitions with regards to digital or net or post-net art, and we are trying to do another one next year. So this is a work that we have commissioned some years ago, the economic threads, which what it does, it takes content from the archives of the Employment Institute, the National Employment Institute, and it takes also patterns from traditional clothes that women would actually weave in 50 or 100 years ago, and it takes them and it introduces some glitch, and then it produces these fabrics that you see there. So it's a very interesting one, a very interesting conceptually work by Maria Varela and Marinos Koutsomichalis and Aphrodite Psara. So I mentioned who the artists are, which is really important. And if you see it as a work of art, it's very interesting because it talks about labor and the different forms of labor and affectional labor and glitch and how all these things come together. But the reason why it's so interesting to us is because it shows you that visualization is not just about monitors. These people have visualized some labor data and economic data, and they did it in a very interesting and surprising way. So what we got to know about this one is our role as an institution that tries to promote contemporary art is to also show to people that if you want to visualize something, you can do more than a pie chart, right? And it doesn't need to be on a screen. So I think this is an important thing. It's also important for us to actually know the artists that we have and the artists to know what they're doing, and I think these guys do. Thank you. So going to the final thing, which is the simple. This comes from a project we were doing in parallel to the Europeana space projects and the hackathons and the demonstrators. We developed 2 mini sites about e-learning, which would actually use content in order to, the first one, to document a particular show, a theater play. So you would if we had the Waves by Virginia Woolf, you would need to collect, you had as a task to collect material about Virginia Woolf and the play and figure out what it is and talk to the actors and produce, let's say, a reportage, being a cultural journalist for this particular one. And it was addressed to people which were about from 10 to 15 years old. And the second one is then we took another pretty much the same WordPress platform, and we asked people, we provided them tools in order to produce posters, make short animation videos or stop motion animation, etc. Now, why these are interesting to us here? First thing is we had the discussion whether we should go to something complicated or very education specific, and then we decided no, we're just going for WordPress. Just figure out something which is a learning module, which is extremely simple to use. And if something bad happens with our contractor developer, because as I said before, we are not a software house, be able to really quickly substitute and keep up with your work and make it extremely simple for the teacher to actually use it. So it follows the same philosophy as the stuff we had for the pilot, the things we did for the demonstrator. So one thing is that they are open source tools. The second thing, they are extremely standard. People know about them. It was very easy for us to actually solve any problems we had along the way. And the other thing which we are planning for next year is to have a mini hackathon, a very low, very short hackathon just for WordPress and educational resources, for us to identify talent which we could use for our organization, but also to improve our websites. So basically that's it. I'll just go very quickly through what we've learned. Hacking with others is important. It's not just hacking, but learning and working with the community. And we're really thankful for being in this project and being able to do that. Use the platform, not let the platform use you. Another important lesson. Third thing, if you're planning to do anything with Wikimedia or Europeana for that purpose, just have a strategy. Just don't do it without thinking why you're doing it. And fourth thing, visualization is not just about monitors. It's not just about computer screens. It's something which increasingly becomes physical. And finally, physical. And finally, keep it as simple as you can. Thank you very much.